Okay, a really amazing thing has happened in the world of AI in the last couple of weeks with a tool. The big one is a tool called Cursor, which now has created like an entirely new category of entrepreneurs who don't even know how to code, but are creating software from scratch with 100% AI written code. Now, are there limitations to that? Are there risks? Are there trade-offs? Absolutely. But it's a big step towards anyone being able to create the software that they need for any specific nuanced problems. Enter accountants. Who has a better understanding of the nuanced, fiddly, like data integration problems and all these business-specific headaches? Who has a better understanding of those things than accountants, the ones who are at the center of all of the data in a business? When you can snap your finger, snap them, and summon into existence a custom solution for the problem that client has, like, how does that change how we get our work done? Does it? Or am I an accountant? Don't bother me with that. That's not my job. Also, because it's Q&A Friday, what is the ultimate pricing method for professional services? We found it. We got the answer. We can give it to you in just a minute. Also, Carbon, the practice management software, they just launched maybe the most interesting new launch in the accounting space of the year. I'm going to tell you about it. I'm going to call out a listener of this podcast that did something very brave, and we are all going to pile on as a crew, and we'll wrap it up with what was an inspiring thing for me. Hopefully gives you some juice to keep doing what you're doing. So come on in, let's talk about it. It's Q&A Friday. Jason Daly. Longtime purveyors of my content know that I have long been a nerd when it comes to software and automation, all that stuff. Seems like 2 years ago it was no code, right? Like that was the big hot thing. And no code still is rad. But just in the last couple of weeks, boy, the internet there's seen this explosion of people whipping together these super quick apps from scratch, but specifically people without any coding expertise at all. And this is the worst that it's ever going to be. This is the hardest it's ever going to be to build your own stuff today. And so if we're on this trajectory, particularly with the speed of how quickly language models are getting better, and most people think we'll get GPT-5, the next OpenAI model, kind of just after the next election cycle. So if by the end of the year, we're going to have even better tools to like whip together your own little quick apps, how does this impact what we do? Is it yet another thing that accountants end up kind of picking up and leading the charge on with their clients, just like cloud adoption and COVID relief? And in many ways, I think AI will go this way, where it's this sort of potential existential threat to a bunch of different types of work until you lean into it. And I would hazard a guess that for many SMBs, it will be their accountant that will say like, hey, here's a better tool for this thing that you're doing. Do you want me to help you implement it? Because accountants are just generally more ahead of the curve than their SMB clients. And so how does all that change when it becomes trivial to create software? Because back to the very first computers that were made in Egyptian times, back to the very beginning, software has been on this inevitable path towards simplification, towards it being easier and easier to build stuff. And in the beginning, people were like, you were managing memory and managing the specific hardware in a computer, all these different things you had to do. But over time, all that got abstracted. You got coding languages that would manage all that stuff for you in the background, and you wouldn't have to get into it yourself. And every time something got further abstracted, there was a group of people that would say, oh, these kids will never understand the value of knowing how to do this or that. And then that next generation was more productive because they didn't have to manage all that stuff themselves. And somehow the world kept spinning when they didn't know how to do that thing. But that abstraction, it happens over and over and over and over again. And now we have people like Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, saying people probably just won't write software in the very near future, or software will be written in plain English. We had the CEO of Amazon Web Services saying in 24 months' time, a lot of their programmers will probably not be asked to program still. They'll be doing other things. And writing code, in my mind, is kind of the equivalent of like classifying transactions in bookkeeping. There's so many AI companies right now that are like, oh, we cracked it. We finally solved accounting. And they're using AI to like get slightly more accurate about classifying transactions. And all the accountants are like, that's what you think I do? Is classify transactions? No, I tell Steve for the umpteenth time, buddy, your car wash isn't deductible. Stop putting this thing on that card. Send me the gosh darn thing that I need to do this, and then let me help you make these financial statements actionable. That's my job, not classifying transactions. I got bank rules for that, and I'd handle the leftovers. And I think code in many ways is that. Like, you go through school, you learn how to code, and very quickly your life becomes about everything but the code. It's product management. It's deciding what should and shouldn't be done. It's playing in the sandbox with other grown-ups. And so we're at this like next step of abstraction where everybody's like, wow, these kids will never be able to do what we could do when we had to write our own code. And eventually that stuff, by and large, will just go away. Like, there will always be a cross-section where somebody has to understand how the IRS servers work. And that super technical use case where like, oh, we got to squeeze the last 10% we can out of this. It's really important. So they have to know the deep technical things. There will always be exceptions like that. But the vast majority move on to that next, more abstracted version, which doesn't look like it's really going to involve writing code. Particularly if it rides the wave of like the language models that are just getting way better really, really fast. Now, I shared some basic versions of this, and the main like platform people are using for this is called Cursor, C-U-R-S-O-R, and it's like a programming environment, but it just writes the code for you. It is still like going to be over the head of all but the kind of biggest nerds, like among the folks listening to this podcast. But a much more accessible version of this that I've shared in the past is a built-in thing that Claude has. Claude, a really good AI assistant. Website's just claude.ai. They have a built-in thing called Artifacts where it will write code for you, but in another window will actually run that code. And so you can make all sorts of silly things. I made a laundry folding simulator. I made several things like a few weeks back, and we shared it in the newsletter, where you literally just have a conversation with the AI assistant. It writes the code for you, and then it shows you the app. But the real value is then you can continue the conversation and say, move this button over here, make this do that. Change this to be that way. Make this look better. Give it a modern design. And every time you have that back and forth with the AI assistant, it modifies the actual live app. And then with Claude's Artifacts, you can actually share a link to the app itself to anyone, whether they're a Claude user or not, which is really cool. The notion you could talk with an assistant, make a little computer program, and then share a public link of it with somebody else. Today's episode is sponsored in part by LiveFlow, who just recently rolled out Zero support for the first time. Really exciting. If you're not familiar with LiveFlow, LiveFlow syncs your Cubio or Zero data into Excel or Google Sheets on a one-time basis, on an ongoing basis. Build out big old work paper templates and sync a whole bunch of data, your favorite reports from the accounting system out with the click of a button. Even then reuse those templates across different companies. Cool use case, actually. We're getting more into sort of lead magnets and attracting better clients in the podcasts, one of the themes that we're kind of going through. And so what's a like quick and easy lead magnet you could deliver to a specific type of potential client? It's something that you build out in a spreadsheet that gets them to some sort of conclusion. And all it requires is getting you access to the QuickBooks file. You run that like template with LiveFlow to pull all that data into a workbook that is ultimately a deliverable that can go to that lead to say, look at X, Y, and Z. Here's some issues we identified. Here's some opportunities, whatever that is. It could literally be as simple as highlighting all the silly things they're doing in their accounting file. But LiveFlow, because with the click of a button, you can sync all of that data out, be it a single sheet or a whole ton of sheets, 30 sheets into a workbook. You can templatize what that looks like and then use it across as many clients as you want. Now, that's like the tip of the iceberg. LiveFlow also does consolidations. You can use it to give limited access to accounting data to like stakeholders, people within the company. Bunch of ways you can use that one. Basically just gives you a button you can click in your favorite spreadsheet app to instantly pull in any data that you want from the ledger. Pretty handy, right? That's LiveFlow. Learn more about that one. Check out the link down in the show notes. Today's episode is sponsored in part by TeamUp, your friends who are going to help you find talented accountants in the Philippines. And they got a newsletter where you can sign up and get a little bit educated every week about what it's like working with offshore team members, a distributed team, the questions you're embarrassed to ask. Just help little tidbits to your inbox every week. Whether you've done this yet or not, it's worth just learning what that looks like. TeamUp actually just hired 2 new recruiters in the Philippines. They're up to 4 total, so they've got recruiters on the ground in the Philippines who will go out and track down folks who are going to be a fit for you. TeamUp actually only launched last June. They've now worked with 85 firms, with one firm hiring 13 people. How's that for social proof? Honestly, that was my experience starting to hire folks in the Philippines. We got one and then we're like, okay, how quickly can we get a second? And we just kept going because we had such good luck. In fact, as you saw in my podcast episode where I drafted my first 20 people to a firm, like if I were to start a firm tomorrow, like 50% of my hires were in the Philippines. That's what I was doing in my firm when I left. That's how I do it again. We just got really, really good people. And TeamUp helps you do that. TeamUp's approach is to help you hire direct. So you're gonna work directly with that person rather than hiring a company who then employs the person. TeamUp's approach is to hire direct. The other approach is called a BPO. Basically, the partnerships on all my content we've paired now to 2 companies, both who will find you accountants in the Philippines. One is a BPO, one is direct. TeamUp is direct. I would say pros and cons to each. TeamUp's doubling down on doing it direct. That's the way they like to do it. And if that's something you want to explore, you don't cut a check until you actually make a hire. So hop on a call with them, tell them what you're looking for, do some interviews. And if you're not absolutely blown away by somebody, don't make a hire, right? Worst thing you can do in this whole process is just learn more about what that looks like. So if you're interested in hiring folks direct in the Philippines, check out TeamUp, link down in the show notes. And so a really practical example of this, when's this episode going out? Anybody know? Okay, this is Friday. Yesterday on my newsletter, newsletter.jason.cpa, I shared a really cool practical example of this, where I took an existing profit sharing calculation that was a little bit hairy and required some wild Excel formulas to get to work. And actually, in less time that it took me to set that up in a spreadsheet and figure out the formulas, I created a little single-page web app that would do that profit calculation. Basically, there's multiple tiers to how the split is calculated based on how much money is made. Like the first X amount is split one way, the next X amount is split another way. And using Claude, I made like a standalone app that would calculate this. And we worked with a bunch of docs and different people in my firm that had all these wildly creative profit sharing agreements. And every single month, we would plug it into a spreadsheet, and it was high stakes. There was my partner who struggled with not doing everything himself. He had this client who was like his favorite client, but like a very overbearing. They were like super on top of you, would pounce on any mistake that you made. But for whatever reason, he loved these people and was very reticent to like let other people do the work for this client besides himself. And so they had this huge gnarly spreadsheet of how money got shared between all the different docs. And they did it every month. And we had to like pry this thing from his fingers to get him to let somebody else to do it for him because it would take a bunch of time. But this spreadsheet was so big and it had all these formulas and nobody understood how they worked but him. And it was so easy to break that like, man, this would have been so much better as a like single page app where folks could see it and understand how it worked. And there was no risk of breaking the formulas. You think about like, recurring sort of work papers that we create that are a big spreadsheet, PDFs that you generate, integration problems that you have where it's like, I got to convert data from format A to format B every single month. We encounter so many fiddly little things that no off-the-shelf software tool is ever going to solve for. Where to have the power of like manifesting in just a few paragraphs this custom bit of software and then being able to change it just through a quick conversation with an AI assistant, man, I just think that is so flippin' cool because we accountants, we have this like depth of understanding of the data problems that virtually no one else in a business has. Like accounting at the end of the day, it's kind of just an integration problem. We got to get data from A to B and apply some logic in the middle. So if you haven't seen that example yet, check out my newsletter from yesterday. Super practical example of how you can use that. Something you'd like literally charge for, or at the very least will make you more efficient in what you're doing. In my accounting firm, we had sold a bit of software development where we like built some custom things for a few clients. And the downside of that was you needed people that knew how to build and manage that stuff. And I actually had a couple accountants on my team who super geeked on that and figured it out. And I felt like I had support there. So there wasn't a single person going out and building something, but then they were the only one that knew how it worked. Like that's the trap. So we overcame that because thankfully I had a couple accountants who got super into that stuff. But the downside is if you don't have that, like you don't want to be the only one that understands how that automation stuff works. But the upside was when we built this stuff for our clients, we could charge really well for it because it solved some really painful problems, some integration problems. Like we had a like 6 campus religious organization that just had a very specific way that they needed to do time off approvals and the flow of approvals through like different people. And we set up this sequence of basically Airtable forms where all that stuff got managed. We set up the system that they would ultimately use for managing like their daycare schedule. We set up several different things where going out and having somebody like a developer build a custom thing from scratch for them would have been super cost prohibitive. Probably wouldn't have even been a big enough project for a proper software development house to be willing to take on. But we were able to add like $2,500 a month to this engagement for this custom software that we built for them. We do an upfront project where we charge them to create it, and then like an ongoing portion that is you're going to pay us to maintain this like month over month. And it was largely passive revenue. And I have come upon a few firms out there who have found a specific thing like this, something custom that they can build around a very specific niche need, where they have built some crazy profitable small firms just around this specific need that they have largely automated. It's frankly a cool opportunity when you can see this and you're like, oh my gosh, this person's doing this and they're wasting how much time on it? Gang, I'm pretty sure with a half day's work, we could automate this. Or, I mean, maybe with 3 weeks work, we could automate this. But the bigger question is, how many other people have this exact same problem? Do all shipbuilders have this problem? And this now becomes a really attractive persona to pull in because we can solve this problem. We have this compelling solution for them. I've shared before how we automated some like cash reconciliation issues that dental clinics had. And we started selling that add-on service, which was a pain point unique to them. They don't want to give their admin access to the bank, but the doc shouldn't be spending time reconciling cash deposits to patient payments. We built this automated solution. Dentists would pay really well for it because it was saving them, like literally saving them chair time where they could go and be making money. And I think the biggest impact of like software development being democratized and anybody being able to build this stuff is I think we will see more firms building around specific solutions like that, where they have a deep understanding of a nuanced problem that an off-the-shelf tool probably isn't going to solve for. And they can build a specialization around that because that can be a super profitable way for them to find new work, but also serve those clients on an ongoing basis. And when you've got custom solutions for a client, that is a very, very sticky relationship. Will be super interesting to see how that stuff develops. Okay, the ultimate pricing method. I told you I was going to tell you what it is. You ready? This is actually from a recent Brandon Hall newsletter where he said he thinks accountants are too pricing obsessed. And this is one of the takeaways from the podcast episode we did from Brandon a couple weeks back. He said folks are super fixated on pricing, but oftentimes this is the wrong lever. And he would tell you that the ultimate pricing for an accounting firm at the end of the day is whatever the market's willing to pay, regardless of how you get there. It could be hourly billing. A lot of accounting firms have made a lot of money on hourly billing. Could be fixed pricing, could be value billing. At the end of the day, more important, what is the market willing to pay me? And how do we crank on that profitably? All of the like, how did we arrive at that price? Was it this? Was it that? All that is just like a level of inside baseball that doesn't impact how much the person on the other side of the table will happily pay, right? Now, Brandon actually goes so far as to say like we are too fixated on price. We should instead be focused on volume, like cranking more people through that funnel once you get your price there. I do think there's a stage at which you find equilibrium. And at that point, the conversation can go one of two ways. It can actually go, all right, how do we cram as many people as we can through this pipeline? But where I would probably disagree with Brandon here is over the impact you have on what price someone is willing to pay, because that is something that is truly an asset of a firm that can be invested in. Becoming more exclusive, becoming more sought after so that the price that people are willing to pay actually goes up. We've been talking about the value ladder and how you get people who are in that like core pipeline, like main service offering. How do you get those people up to the premium service? And if you have a whole bunch of people in that premium service, is there actually a level beyond that people would happily do? Where as soon as you get somebody into that tier, the profitability of that client is then the equivalent of like 10 clients at that base tier. So ultimately at the end of the day, like what is the right pricing mechanism? It super doesn't matter. It's so inside baseball. It's whatever the market equilibrium is. But then be mindful of how you can actually invest in things that will increase the perceived value of that. Ultimately, an offer can be very good or very bad. Like it so much comes down to the framing of what we're putting in front of people. And if it's not working, oftentimes it's just because the offer isn't good enough. Maybe it's not a specific enough person. Maybe it's not a pain that is felt acutely enough by that type of person. And that's why like exploring different offers and exploring different specializations and niches and all that, like you are looking for gold nuggets where you find that very, very specific pain that is rare that people feel acutely and they'll pay top dollar to solve for. Finding that, building a framework around it to attract people to it, that really, really painful pain, and then just cranking on that thing. Like it doesn't have to be, and this is kind of, I think, what Brandon's getting to. It doesn't have to be exploratory until the end of time. The goal is to find a killer framework that you can sell around, run webinars around, whatever it is, hire other people to sell that framework, run webinars for that framework, because you believe it is like the best way to frame clients coming into your firm where they'll happily pay top dollar. They're a great fit for what you do, and maybe even positioned to go further up that value ladder down the road. I'm kind of bored of the pricing conversation too. I think we can move on from that. There are a lot of firms that for sure are like stuck in a bad spot with pricing and they haven't pushed that envelope far enough. A lot of that honestly comes from like self-worth issues of letting the C and D clients who complain take up too much of their headspace and then not think about the A and B clients who would happily pay even more. Big trap, big trap is making firm decisions with C and D clients in your mind rather than making firm decisions that are going to be best for the A and B clients. Oftentimes it is those C and D clients who are so loud that will keep us from making a change that will be great for A and B clients and attract more A and B clients, but you're afraid to do it because you'll piss off the C and D clients. That's just a recipe for letting those people control your business, right? And not letting you get to a better place. This episode is brought to you in part by Makers Hub. If you've been around the channel long, we've done a number of demo days with Makers Hub showing off how they're using AI vision models to automate your accounts payable services, your bill pay services that you offer to clients. Super smart, handle some really gnarly stuff. Well, they've been busy. They keep shipping updates. A couple things they've shipped recently. They got a W-9 module now to take the headache out of 1099 season just in time. Man, that's coming up. You got W-9s for all those vendors? Oh, do it now. Don't kick yourself in January again. And then they also shipped sequential approvals. So by default, approvals in Makers Hub have historically been like approvals in parallel. If 3 people need to approve something, they can all do it at a time. Now, optionally, you can make those approvals sequential where they have to be step by step. They don't go to person 2 until they go to person 1, that sort of thing. Some cool improvements they've shipped recently and got a bunch more cool stuff on the way. So if you're looking for a more profitable way to run your bill pay practice, check out the link to Makers Hub down in the show notes. This episode is sponsored in part by Stanford Tax. If you run a U.S. tax firm, you know just how crotchety the information gathering process has been for tax prep for eons. Sending out these nasty organizers, asking boilerplate questions that you frankly already know the answers to. So the client's like, why are you making me do this work? Stanford Tax, they're gonna give you a super intelligent way to gather that information. Step 1, connect your tax software. Whatever your role, Assert, Pro Series, Drake, UltraTax, CCH Access. Import thousands of clients in under 10 minutes. Step 2, get personalized questionnaires, personalized to each client, includes prior year numbers, detailed document checklists, like based on the actual data from last year, fast and easy for your clients to fill out. Do this for 1040s, but also 1120Ss, 1120s, 1065s. And then step 3, you get a PDF work paper of that client's submission. So you get a nice, tidied up, organized bookmark. It's got all the documents they uploaded, all the ways they answered the questions, all that stuff in a single place so that prep process is already halfway down the road. I don't know, a ways down the road, and the client had a clean, straightforward, modern experience getting you that stuff. Stanford's one of a few companies using AI to innovate in how we approach our tax workflows. Learn more about that one. Check out the link to Stanford Tax down in the show notes. Okay, Karbon launched something that I think, frankly, is amazing. Karbon, K-A-R-B-O-N. They're a practice management system. Jason, why are you shilling so hard for Karbon right now? They launched a practice marketplace. Buy and sell high-performing accounting firms. Buy a firm, sell your firm, build your firm. I'll link this down in the show notes. Basically, firms that are using Karbon, if you're wanting to sell your firm, they will list you on this marketplace where other users of Karbon can see that firm is up for sale. And as we've talked in firm acquisition episodes in the past, so much of the right target for an acquisition comes down to tech stack, comes down to being able to integrate what the previous practitioner was doing with what you want to do going forward. And it is so hard to change that tech stack. Arguably, your PM is smack dab in the center of that tech stack. Maybe the only bigger thing is if you're a tax shop, what tax software you're using. Frankly, I think this is genius by Carbon. They're not charging a thing for it. Like, they're not taking a cut like a broker would. It seems weird to me that like human beings are going to be able to facilitate all this stuff on their own without some sort of adult moderating or holding people's hand through the process. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe there'll have to be more facilitation down the road. But honestly, I think it's genius because they can frame Carbon as like, hey, are you thinking about selling your firm down the road? Well, run your practice on Carbon and it'll be more valuable. Or there's a bigger market of buyers because you're on Carbon. Honestly, I think it's super smart. It doesn't change the underlying tech of Carbon and like whether or not that's the best PM for you. But if you're thinking about acquisitions, I mean, sure, it makes the notion of running your practice on Carbon a little more attractive if you have this rich marketplace of firms that are out there that are running Carbon. I just think it's really smart. I think it's a great lateral thinking, totally non-product related way to get more people to engage with it. Like if I'm a Carbon firm, I'm absolutely checking this out. I think the market for acquiring and merging firms is blocked by how difficult it is and how much gatekeeping there is from like brokers to put these deals together. If there were greater transparency, I've long felt this, around folks who are willing to merge or sell or something like that. If there were greater transparency there, and you could find folks with stacks like yours, I think the market for buying and selling firms would be much larger than it is today. Now, I'm not talking about PE and regional roll-ups and all that. I'm talking more amongst smaller firms. I think the market would be much bigger. Is an example of creating more transparency that I think will lead to more deals than would have otherwise happened. Super interesting. Well done by Carbon on that. Okay, 2 more. Noah Skiles. Imagine how weird Noah feels right now. He's sitting on his Peloton. Everybody's talking about him. Posted this on LinkedIn. Today on Jason Daily, Jason talked about getting better at taking action and spending less time in the analysis paralysis zone. I struggle with posting on social media because I don't feel like I know the right stuff to post on which platforms or the right way to format. There's your analysis paralysis. He said, it's time to take action. I'm going to get my poop emoji together for September. I'm going to challenge myself to post something every single day on at least one platform. What will you publicly challenge yourself to accomplish in September? Noah, good for you. Here's what's going to happen next is I've linked Noah's LinkedIn post down in the show notes. I want everybody to go spam Noah's LinkedIn post. Absolute herd mentality. Let's go pile on. Here's the funny thing about the internet. Had Noah not posted this, I wouldn't have shared it here. You all wouldn't have gone and piled on that post. The engagement you're adding to that post wouldn't have made that post show up in a whole bunch more people's algorithms. And a few people are going to read that and be like, yeah, no, I got this problem too. I analyze things too much. I just need to start. And it's going to be bad, but that's okay. I got to get the bad ones all out of the way so that it can be good. That's the way to think about it, is get all the bad versions out the door because that is a prerequisite to doing it well. And had Noah not posted this, we wouldn't be talking about it. You wouldn't be thinking about it. It wouldn't be showing up in as many people's feeds. Gang, this day and age is so much driven by just being visible, being present every single day. And if you think about where your career is going to be 30 years down the road, the compounding benefits of being visual and engaging and not lurking are massive and will take you to a wildly different place. I mean, we just heard last week a commenter on the podcast now running an accountant community. Like, that's just how these things start. That's how my entire journey started, was posting on Twitter. And then eventually being like, oh, there's actually a lot of people who could use a more private space to talk about this sort of thing. My accountant community grew from there. That funded the content we create. That's how all those things start. So no, good for you for going out and making that post. Hopefully you didn't get bucked off the Peloton when we started talking about you. I'm always fascinated by what people do when they're listening to this. Peter, I think you said you listened to the podcast on like a exercise bike or something like that. I'm always thinking, anytime an episode's going along, I'm thinking Peter listens to an episode start to finish on a bike ride. Peter's got to be exhausted by now. We got to wrap this up. Okay, with the spirit of getting Peter off the bike, last thing for Q&A Friday. Creating content and like, it can feel like a lot, like you have to write something from scratch every day and find something new and novel to say. The reality is, like, the secret is not finding a new novel story to say every day, but finding 100 ways to say the same story. Because like the secret to getting your business to repeatable processes and something that you can really crank on is a single value ladder, like a high converting framework that finds someone feeling a very specific pain to get them into that value ladder and just cranking on the best version of that until the end of time. Running the same webinar every single month, running the same ads, telling the same story, employing other people to sell that framework and tell that story as well. And so when we go to social media and you post something and you're like, the next day you're thinking, should I say something similar? The next week you're like, I already said that. Nobody saw that. And if they did, they sure don't remember. I struggle with this with the podcast a lot. Like, we're 320 episodes in. We've been running a daily podcast for 18 months. And I'll be like, I think I said something about that 14 months ago. Gang, the great news is nobody cares. We are all so self-absorbed with our own stuff. Nobody cares enough to remember the fact that you did say that thing. And the way social media algorithms work, in all likelihood, they never even saw it. But if they did, there's a very high likelihood that they don't remember it. So don't feel the need to reinvent the wheel. Try to be consistent. How do I show up and be visible every day? Because that's much more important than having something novel or groundbreaking to say each day. A really useful framing around creating videos that Mr. Beast always brings up is just figure out how to make one small thing better every single day. And so if you're serious about trying to get better at social media, and I would still encourage you not to take this too far, because if you put too much pressure on yourself, you just won't do it when the main value is being visible and engaging, getting into the comments on other people's posts, which is that's what 80% of social media ought to be. But if you're serious about getting better about it and you want to invest in this, think about what's one small thing I could do better each day just to improve. And with some routine, putting a couple of months in, you're going to be in a completely different place and you're going to make a bunch of friends along the way. There's so much to be gained just by being out there and being visible. Don't feel the need to reinvent the wheel. Instead of telling 100 stories, find 100 ways to get back to the same story, the transformation that you want to enable for people. That's it for today, gang. Keep those questions coming down in the comments. Thanks for hanging today. I'll see you in the next one.